Going through everyday situations is one thing, but I've seen how ordinary moments can turn into something people can't survive. Hello, I'm Nathan Cole, and today I've got 5 stories just like that. From a woman who ends up under the ground she was walking on, to a man standing below a building as part of it begins to separate above him. It was May 22nd, 2016, in a residential neighborhood in Birmingham, Alabama. Late morning, quiet street. Nothing unusual going on. A few people were out walking, moving through a normal day. Danielle Harper was 32 years old and worked as an administrative assistant at a small office a couple miles from where she lived. Most mornings, if the weather was decent, she walked. Same route, same timing, same sidewalk. She wasn't someone who took risks. Her routine was steady, predictable, and that stretch had never given her a reason to think twice. The walk didn't really change from day to day. Same houses, same driveways, same section of pavement she'd gone over countless times. After a while, you stop paying attention to each step. It just feels familiar. There were small details along the way, but nothing that stood out. A slight slope in one section, a patch of concrete from an old repair, grass creeping closer to the edge in places. The kind of things you notice once and then stop thinking about. But underneath that section, something had been changing for a long time. A slow leak from an underground line had been washing soil away, little by little. Not enough to show on the surface, not enough for anyone to notice. Just gradual loss over time, leaving empty space beneath the concrete. From above, the surface still held its shape. It felt solid underfoot, but the support underneath had been reduced to a thin layer of compacted material. At around 10:40 that morning, Danielle was midway through her walk, normal pace. 2 people were about 30 feet behind her, and a few more were across the street. The section beneath her foot gave slightly, not enough to immediately collapse, just a brief shift, like the ground wasn't responding the way it should. The surface dipped, then held. Then it gave further. A crack formed across the concrete, spreading outward in a short line before the entire section dropped. The slab broke apart and fell into the space below, pulling her down with it. She fell into the opening as the concrete and soil followed. The initial drop brought her down onto loose ground and debris. Broken pieces of concrete landed around her, some shifting into place as they settled. For a moment, the opening above remained roughly defined. Then, the edges began to break, and soil started to crumble inward. What had been a clear opening became narrower as material continued to fall in. The debris began to collect around her lower body first. Loose soil and fragments shifted downward, filling space around her legs and waist. Each small movement above caused more material to fall, adding weight and reducing the space around her. The sides of the hole weren't stable. The people behind her reached the edge within seconds, but stopped short. The ground near the opening showed signs of giving, small cracks spreading outward, bits of concrete shifting under pressure. One of them stepped closer and tested the edge. The surface dipped slightly under their weight. It was enough to show that the ground around the collapse wasn't holding. From where they stood, the depth made it difficult to reach her directly. The opening was roughly 10 to 12 feet deep, with uneven footing and debris covering the bottom. There was no stable surface to step onto, and no clear way to descend without causing more of the edge to break away. Leaning in wasn't an option either. Any shift in weight near the edge caused additional material to fall into the hole. One of them attempted to reach down, but couldn't get close enough for a secure hold without putting more pressure on the unstable edge. Each attempt risked making the collapse worse. The material around her compacted further as additional soil and fragments settled into place. The weight increased, restricting movement and reducing the space available to breathe. The fall turned into being pinned under the debris. Time passed without any safe way to reach her from above. By the time the area was stabilized and access could be made safely, the conditions inside the collapse had already worsened beyond recovery. Danielle Harper died from compressive asphyxia caused by the weight of soil and debris that accumulated around her after the collapse. The incident was ruled accidental. The failure was later attributed to long-term underground erosion beneath the sidewalk caused by a leaking line. For Danielle, it was a routine walk on a familiar path, and the ground beneath her failed without warning. I kept thinking the next one would feel just as slow, but it's a damp road, a slight drift off the pavement, and the car doesn't stop where the road ends. It was November 3rd, 2018, on a rural road outside of Macon, Georgia. Early evening, just after sunset. The light was fading, but it wasn't completely dark yet. That in-between time where you can still see the road, just not as clearly. No streetlights, no signals, just a two-lane road running alongside a narrow river and passing under a low concrete bridge. Michael Turner was heading home after spending most of his day on the road. At 38, working as a delivery driver, driving didn't require much thought anymore. It was something he was used to. He usually took a back road instead of the highway. Not because it saved much time, but because it was easier. Less traffic, fewer stops, nothing that forced you to react quickly. After a while, a drive like that starts to feel automatic. When a drive feels that familiar, do you still pay attention, or do you just expect it to go the way it usually does? Earlier that day, it had rained, not heavily, but enough to leave the road damp in patches. By evening, it didn't look like much. The surface reflected a bit of light, but nothing that would immediately stand out as a hazard. It looked like a road you could drive without thinking much about it. At around 6:15 p.m., Michael was heading home. Traffic was light. One car had passed him going the other way, and another vehicle was behind him at a distance, far enough that it wasn't affecting how he drove. As he approached the curve before the bridge, his right side tires drifted slightly off the pavement. It wasn't sudden, more like a gradual movement toward the edge, something that can happen without you realizing it right away. On a dry road, correcting something like that is usually simple, but the shoulder didn't give him much to work with. When his tires left the pavement, they met a softer, uneven surface. He turned the wheel left to correct, but the response wasn't immediate. The damp pavement and loose edge reduced traction, and the car didn't grip the way it normally would. Instead of correcting back onto the road, the vehicle continued moving to the right. Within seconds, the car crossed the shoulder and moved down the embankment, the slope guiding it toward the water without enough traction to recover. The front entered first, dipping under as water pushed over the hood and across the windshield, briefly leaving the rear elevated before the weight pulled the rest of the vehicle in. The driver behind him saw the headlights angle downward and disappear, stopping along the road moments later. Inside, the front end dropped sharply on impact, shifting his position forward as water began entering from below. He reached for the door, but it wouldn't move. The pressure from the outside held it shut, and without enough water inside to equalize it, it wasn't going to open. As water rose past his legs, movement became more difficult. With the car angled downward, the front filled first, forcing him to shift upward as the available space began to shrink. From the roadside, the witness moved closer but stopped at the edge. The ground there was soft and sloped toward the water, making it unsafe to go down. He pulled out his phone and called emergency services, reporting that a vehicle had gone into the water. Inside, the remaining space continued to shrink. The windows didn't break, and without a tool, breaking them from the inside becomes difficult, especially as the water outside adds pressure against the glass. The rear of the vehicle held a small pocket of air for a short time, but it continued shrinking inch by inch, with nowhere else to move. As the water rose higher, movement became more limited. The remaining space narrowed to the upper part of the cabin, forcing him into a fixed position as the air pocket continued to disappear. From the road, the witness could see the roof of the car still above the surface for a short time. Then it dipped lower, slowly, until it disappeared completely. He remained on the line, relaying what he could see as the vehicle went under. The entire sequence took only a few minutes, far shorter than the time it would take for emergency responders to arrive. Emergency responders arrived shortly after and located the vehicle beneath the surface. Recovery crews later secured and pulled it from the water, where Michael Turner was found inside. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was drowning. The incident was determined to be accidental, caused by loss of traction on a damp roadway and the absence of a barrier along the edge. What was supposed to be a familiar drive ended up with him trapped inside his car as it filled with water. I thought being trapped inside a car was bad enough, but the next one happens in a mall where something overhead starts to give way without anyone noticing. It was July 22nd, 2017, in a shopping mall just outside of Des Moines, Iowa. Early evening, right when the weekend crowd starts to settle in. Not packed, but busy enough that the main walkways stayed active, with people moving between stores, stopping at kiosks, and gathering in the open areas near the center. Emily Carter was 27 years old and had plans to meet two friends at the mall that night. It was something they had set up earlier in the week, just a few hours to walk around, get something to eat, and catch up. She arrived a little earlier than the others. After coming in through one of the main entrances, she made her way toward the central section of the mall, where most people tended to gather. The layout opened up there, with wider walkways, seating areas, and a steady flow of foot traffic moving in different directions. To one side of that space was a small indoor play structure. It sat on padded flooring and was enclosed by low barriers with benches arranged around it. Parents were seated nearby while children moved through the structure, climbing, crawling, and passing through the same sections again and again. The structure looked the way it was supposed to, with no visible shifts or sounds that suggested anything was off. Emily moved closer to the area, stopping near the edge of the barrier. The structure was fully visible from where she was. It was compact but layered. Some sections raised slightly above the base, connected by enclosed tunnels and short platforms. Children moved through it in a steady pattern, entering from one side and exiting on the other. One of the enclosed tunnel sections extended slightly over the edge of the play area, positioned above part of the outer walkway. She remained near that section, standing alongside the barrier. The tunnel was held in place by metal supports fixed to the frame on both sides. It was designed to stay steady as children moved through it, but one of the supports had come loose from its mounting point. At a glance, everything still appeared in place. The tunnel remained supported at both ends, with a slight misalignment that wasn't easy to notice from the ground. But as a child moved through the section, the structure shifted slightly against the weakened side. The support no longer held firm under the load. The tunnel dipped, then settled. A moment later, another child entered the same section, and the added weight pulled the connection further away from its mounting point. The tunnel tilted downward on one side, shifting its full weight onto the remaining support. It held for a moment, then failed. The section dropped from one side, rotating downward as it came loose from the frame. Emily was standing beneath that section. The tunnel dropped directly onto her from above, driving her to the ground on impact. The rest of the structure remained in place. Movement around the area changed as people along the walkway turned toward the play structure. Some stepped closer, others stopped at a distance. Inside the play area, adults began guiding children out through the nearest opening, clearing the space. A few people approached the edge of the barrier but didn't step inside. Around that time, her two friends were making their way through the same central area of the mall. From a distance, they could see a small group forming near the play structure. As they got closer, the reason became clearer. They stopped near the edge of the barrier, looking toward the structure where the section had fallen. And what they saw when they got there is what hit me the hardest. Their friend beneath it, partially covered by the collapsed section. The space was kept clear as responders arrived and secured the scene. Emily Carter was pronounced dead from severe injuries sustained when the overhead section collapsed and struck her directly. The incident was ruled accidental. The failure was later attributed to a weakened support that had loosened over time. The play structure was removed from use following the incident as the area was inspected and evaluated. Inside a busy mall, a loose support fails and part of a play structure drops onto someone standing just outside it. What makes the next one different for me is how close it all is. A picnic with the kids near the road, and something crosses into that space. If these stories are something you want to see more of, consider subscribing to Fatal Files. It helps me keep this series going. It was June 18, 2017, at a public park just outside of Springfield, Missouri. Early afternoon, the kind of day where the weather feels steady and predictable. Clear sky, light breeze, nothing that suggested anything out of the ordinary. Families were spread across the grass, small groups gathered under trees, the low hum of conversation carrying across the open space. Adam Ellison was 36 years old and had taken the day off work. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just meeting up with his sister and her two kids for a picnic. It wasn't planned out in detail, just something simple. Food packed in a cooler, a blanket laid out on the grass, a few hours to relax. Don't you just love how easy days like that feel? when nothing seems like it could go wrong? The area they chose wasn't far from a narrow access road that ran along the edge of the park. It wasn't busy, mostly used by maintenance vehicles and the occasional driver passing through. The road sat slightly elevated above the grass, separated by a short slope that leveled out near where people were sitting. From where they were, it didn't feel close enough to matter. People passed by every so often. Cars moved slowly along the road, never fast enough to draw attention. After a while, it just blended into the background. Adam was sitting near the edge of the blanket, facing toward the open field. His sister was beside him, unpacking food, while the kids moved a few feet away, kicking a ball back and forth. It was quiet, routine, the kind of moment you stop thinking about while it's happening. At around 2:15 p.m., a vehicle entered the road from the far end of the park. From a distance, nothing about it stood out. It moved at a normal speed, following the slight curve toward where the picnic area opened up. Anyone looking at it wouldn't have seen anything unusual. As it came out of the bend, the vehicle drifted slightly toward the edge of the pavement, not abruptly, just enough to shift its path. A small correction should have brought it back into the lane. It didn't. The right side tires left the road first, dropping onto the uneven surface of the shoulder. That small change reduced traction immediately. When the driver attempted to steer back, the response wasn't clean. The vehicle shifted further instead of correcting. Within seconds, it crossed the remaining edge of the pavement and moved down the slope toward the open grass. From the picnic area, there was almost no time to react. The angle of the slope carried the vehicle forward, momentum building as it left the road completely. What had been a controlled path seconds earlier turned into a direct line toward the people sitting below. Adam turned toward the sound just as the vehicle reached the bottom of the slope. At that distance, there was no space to move, no time to get clear. The vehicle entered the picnic area without slowing enough to avoid impact, crossing directly over the blanket. Adam was in its path. The force of the impact knocked him down immediately, and the vehicle continued forward, passing over him before coming to a stop several feet away. For a moment, no one moved. His sister stepped forward, then slowed as she looked toward where he had fallen. One of the children called out to him from a short distance away. People nearby began to turn and walk over from across the grass, some stopping a few feet back as they reached the edge of the area. A few people who had been closer to the road reached the scene within seconds. Another person pulled out their phone and called emergency services. They arrived shortly after and secured the area. Adam Ellison was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma resulting from the vehicle impact. The incident was ruled accidental. The loss of control occurred before the vehicle left the roadway. A family picnic near a quiet access road turns fatal when a vehicle leaves the pavement and reaches the grass where they're sitting. And then the last one is even simpler. I'm talking about just walking down a sidewalk with something falling from above before there's any time to react. It was August 3rd, 2017, along a downtown sidewalk in a mid-sized city in Ohio. Late afternoon, the kind of time when people are heading out of offices and moving through the streets on their way home. Not crowded, but steady enough that the sidewalk stayed active, with people passing storefronts and crossing intersections without much pause. Aaron Blake was 34 years old and had just finished a long workday. He had stayed late that evening, working through a 12-hour shift before finally packing up to leave. He stepped out of the building and onto the sidewalk, joining the steady flow of people heading home. It wasn't until he had gone a short distance that he realized he had left something on his desk. He turned back and re-entered the building. Inside, he crossed paths with his supervisor, who informed him that his leave request had just been approved. After a brief exchange, Aaron retrieved what he needed and headed back out again. When he stepped onto the sidewalk for the second time, the movement along the street hadn't changed. People passed in both directions, following the same routine pace as before. The buildings along that stretch rose several stories above the street, with rows of windows set evenly across each level, uniform, repeating, and easy to ignore once you'd passed them enough times. Aaron continued along the sidewalk, passing entrances and display windows as he headed toward the next intersection. He moved past a recessed doorway and stepped around a small group gathered near the curb, adjusting his path slightly before continuing forward. Several floors above, one of the windows had already shifted slightly within its frame. The change was minimal, nothing visible from the ground, nothing that would draw attention on its own. The building had a routine inspection scheduled later that week, part of regular maintenance that moved from section to section. At that point, this section had not yet been checked. As the building adjusted to the temperature from earlier in the day, pressure built along one side of the frame. The pane remained in place, but not as evenly supported as it should have been. From below, it still looked no different from the rest, but along one edge, the support had already begun to give, leaving less of the glass secured than it appeared. The remaining contact points held for a moment longer. Then, the glass broke free. The pane dropped from above, falling several stories toward the sidewalk. The angle of the fall carried it slightly outward from the building as it descended. Aaron was directly beneath that section of the building. Unfortunately, he was in the exact path of where it was coming down. The glass picked up speed as it fell. There was no time to move out of its path. It struck him and brought him down to the pavement, shattering on impact and scattering fragments across the surrounding area. The motion stopped immediately after contact. Fragments spread outward across the sidewalk, some sliding a short distance before coming to rest near the curb. The sound of the impact was followed by a call placed to emergency services from the sidewalk. The call came in within moments of the incident, reporting that a pane of glass had fallen from above and struck someone below. Emergency services arrived within minutes and transported Aaron Blake to a nearby hospital. Despite treatment, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival due to severe blunt force trauma sustained from the falling window pane. The incident was ruled accidental, with the failure later attributed to a weakened window frame that no longer held the glass in place. The building underwent inspection following the incident, and the affected section was removed from use pending further evaluation.